What happens when an elderly father hands over his savings to his beloved son? He never imagined it would lead to losing everything he'd spent a lifetime building. What happened next shocked the entire town. Let me start by saying, I wasn't born yesterday. I've lived through rotary phones, vinyl, 3 wars, even if I didn't fight in any, and enough political nonsense to know when something smells off. I've seen men lie to their wives, priests steal from offering trays, and car salesmen put sawdust in the engine. So believe me when I tell you, I should have seen it coming. But I didn't, because it wasn't a stranger who did me in. It wasn't some guy in a cheap suit or a charming scammer on TV. It was my son. Let's back up a second. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of quiet morning that makes you want to believe the world is still decent. The sun was coming through the blinds, birds chirping outside like a Hallmark movie, and I had just finished making a batch of banana pancakes for my neighbor, Doris. Sweet old lady, recently lost her husband, barely eats unless someone reminds her. So every Thursday, I bring her breakfast. Because, well, that's what decent people do. I put the pancakes in a covered plate, walked across the street, and found her sitting on her porch in her oversized sweater, smiling like I'd just given her gold. That smile. It reminded me why I never gave up on kindness, even when the world seemed to laugh in my face for it. We talked for a bit about the weather, the raccoon that's been digging in her trash, and her daughter who never calls. Then I went home, feeling good, like I'd done something right. That was the same day I got a call from my son, Jacob. "Dad," he said, his voice a little too slick, like butter on a hot pan, "can we talk about your finances?" That was the first red flag. But of course, I didn't see it then. You never do when it's your own kid. He came over later that day, wearing one of those expensive quarter-zip sweaters, the kind that says, "I might sell you a house or steal your pension, depending on my mood." He brought his laptop, a notepad, and a fake smile. "Dad, I've been thinking," he began, crossing one leg over the other like he was the host of a talk show. "You're getting older. You don't need to stress about bills, taxes, investments. Let me handle it. I work in finance, remember?" Oh, I remembered. He did work in finance. Until he didn't. Then he sold insurance. Then cryptocurrency. Then I stopped keeping track. His resume had more turns than a country road. But still, he was my son. I looked at him, his bright eyes, the little dimple he's had since he was 5, and I thought, maybe this is what growing old is for. You let the next generation take over. So I did. I signed the papers, a simple manila folder full of forms I didn't read. He called it a durable financial power of attorney, which sounded official and caring, like someone installing safety rails in your shower. In reality, it was a silent eviction from my own life. He smiled, hugged me, told me I was so smart to delegate. I laughed, told him, "Just don't run off to Vegas with it all." He laughed too, but a little too hard. And just like that, my financial life, every dollar I'd saved, every dime I'd pinched, every sleepless night spent budgeting retirement, now rested in the hands of someone who once invested in a startup that sold flavored oxygen. For a few weeks, everything seemed normal. He paid the utility bills, renewed the car insurance, even called the plumber when my kitchen sink backed up. I thought, wow, he's really stepping up. Maybe all those years of worry were for nothing. Then came the first overdraft notice. I opened the envelope like it was radioactive. "Insufficient funds," stared back at me in cold digital typeface. My checking account, the one I'd used for 40 years, was almost empty. I blinked, reread, blinked again. Surely this was a mistake. I called Jacob. "Oh, yeah, Dad," he said, sounding like he was halfway through a smoothie. "I moved your money into a different account. It's part of a new strategy. Low risk, high yield. Don't worry about it." I asked him to send me the details. "I'll email it," he said. He never did. Instead, I got another letter. This time from a credit card company I didn't recognize. Apparently, I now had a balance of $3,200 for a card I never applied for. I called again. No answer. 2 days later, I drove to the bank, took a ticket, sat in a cold plastic chair between a teenage girl scrolling TikTok and a guy with a duffel bag full of loose change. When it was finally my turn, I walked up to the counter and asked to speak to a manager. They brought out a young man, mid-30s, shiny hair, too much cologne. I explained the situation. He clicked a few keys, then looked at me like I had just told him I was the Pope. "Sir," he said, trying to soften the blow, "according to our records, you authorized all these transactions under the power of attorney you signed. Your son has full control." My stomach twisted. I felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. I asked, "Can I revoke it?" He hesitated. "Yes, but it can take time, and depending on how the funds were moved or spent, some of it may not be recoverable." I walked out of that bank in a fog. The world was spinning and my knees felt like they were filled with sand. I sat on the bench outside, next to a man feeding pigeons pieces of stale bread. He looked at me, nodded, and said, "Rough day?" I didn't answer. I just stared straight ahead. What do you call it when your own child steals your future? A betrayal? A crime? Or just the new normal? I didn't have an answer. But I knew this. Something inside me cracked that day. And what started as a small fracture was about to split wide open. What happened next changed everything. You do not want to miss how this unravels. You know what no one tells you about growing old? It's not your joints. It's not your memory. It's not even your bladder deciding it has its own bedtime. It's that people start treating you like you're made of cardboard, like you're sturdy enough to hold something for a while, but not important enough to keep around for the long haul. Disposable, silent, foldable. After that day at the bank, I stopped sleeping. And let me tell you, insomnia at 74 isn't romantic. It's not the wise old man pondering the stars kind of sleeplessness. It's the pacing back and forth trying to decide if it's worth it to make coffee at 3 a.m. kind of hell. I started digging through my records, not that I had much left. What I found horrified me. Jacob hadn't just moved the money. He had harvested it, bit by bit, from savings, from pension, even from the emergency fund I'd set aside for when my teeth finally gave up on staying in place. That fund was now attached to a PayPal account registered under J. Reynolds Holdings, LLC. Funny name for a con job, isn't it? You'd think I would have stormed over to his place, but here's the truth. I hesitated. Why? Because I still wanted to believe in him. That's the cancer of parenthood. Hope. It metastasizes in your logic and eats through your better judgment. You hold on to what was instead of looking at what is. But by the end of the week, hope gave way to a different emotion. Rage. And rage, my friend, is a wonderful thing when you've got nothing left to lose. I got in my car, an old beige Ford that creaked like an elderly dog with arthritis, and drove across town to his house. A gated community, of course, because nothing says financial transparency like living behind a wall. The gate guard looked at me like I was lost. "Visiting?" he asked. "No," I said. "Waking up." That confused him enough to let me through. Jacob's house was bigger than I remembered. 2 stories, white stucco, a driveway that curved like a smug little grin. There was a shiny black SUV parked out front with vanity plates that read, Mogul. I stood there for a moment, staring at the vehicle I probably paid for. Then I rang the bell. It was one of those new-age doorbells that chime like wind harps in a yoga studio, the kind that makes you feel calm before someone stabs you in the back with a contract. Jacob answered in sweatpants and no shirt. Classic entrepreneur look. Behind him, the living room looked like a catalog. Leather couch, massive TV, two golden retrievers napping like royalty. He blinked at me like I was a hallucination. "Dad? Surprised to see me?" I asked. He stammered. I didn't know you were coming. I figured since you have my retirement, you might also want my calendar." He laughed nervously and stepped aside. "Come in." The place smelled like coconut candles and betrayal. I sat on the couch, hands folded. He stood, shifting his weight like a kid caught stealing cookies. Then he launched into a monologue about investments, market shifts, and high-risk, high-reward structures. I stopped him cold. "Jacob," I said, "you stole from me." His face hardened. "Dad, you gave me that power. You signed it. You told me it was to help me. It was, but things changed. Let me tell you something. Nothing, and I mean nothing, makes your blood run colder than watching your own flesh and blood shrug off your life like it's an inconvenient bill. You emptied my accounts," I said. "You opened credit cards. You sold stocks I held for 30 years. For what? Your business? That NFT garbage you posted on Facebook?" His jaw clenched. "I trusted you," I said. "I didn't raise you to be this man." And then he said the one thing that made everything inside me snap. "You're old, Dad. You don't know how the world works anymore. You should be grateful I'm even managing this for you." That's when I stood up, slowly, every vertebra in my spine protesting like a line of rusted nails. "Grateful," I said. "I spent 40 years putting food on your plate, roof over your head, and sense in your skull. And you tell me to be grateful?" He looked away. So I walked. Out the door. Out of the house. Out of the fantasy that blood means loyalty. I didn't cry. That came later, when I got home, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at the checkbook I couldn't balance anymore. Instead, I made a decision. I called a lawyer, a woman named Felicia Kramer. Sharp as a tack and meaner than a cactus. I'd met her at a senior seminar about estate fraud, where she gave a talk titled, "How to Stop Your Kids from Financially Murdering You." Felt relevant. She picked up on the second ring. When I explained everything, she didn't sigh or apologize. She growled. "You've got a case," she said, "and I don't lose." That was the first time in weeks I exhaled without feeling like I was choking. But here's the thing about fighting back. It always costs you something. What followed were meetings, papers, notary appointments, credit freezes, court filings. I spent more time in government buildings than I had in the last 20 years. And every time I thought I'd reached the bottom of what Jacob had done, another trap door opened. He'd refinanced my house. That's right. The house I built with my bare hands, where my late wife painted the kitchen yellow because it felt like sunlight, was now technically not mine, because he'd convinced me to sign something for insurance. It was a second mortgage. And guess whose name was on it? Not mine. I sat in the hallway of the county recorder's office that day, staring at the papers, feeling like the air had been sucked out of me. I thought about Doris, about the banana pancakes, about the stupid way kindness always seems to punch you in the gut when you're not looking. And I thought about revenge. Not the movie kind. No explosions, no car chases, just justice. Real, quiet, devastating justice. That night, I wrote a letter, not to Jacob, to every contact I had, friends, neighbors, ex-colleagues, old clients. I told them what happened. I named names. I sent copies of bank statements, forms, legal papers. I posted it on my church's bulletin board. I shared it in a local Facebook group. I even sent it to a local newspaper under my real name. I wasn't hiding anymore. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for, it starts now. Stay with me. You need to see what happens when the truth finally hits back. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, you know something fundamental about pain. It's not the sharp stab that hurts the most. It's the echo of every dinner table conversation, every birthday card, every bedtime story. It plays on loop, louder and louder, until you either scream or break. I chose neither. I chose to fight. After I mailed out that letter, what some called a declaration of war and others called a damn masterpiece, something in me shifted. Not dramatically, not like a phoenix rising. No, it was slower, like a glacier deciding it was tired of being quiet. Turns out, the truth has claws. Within a week, things started moving. My neighbor Helen stopped me on my morning walk. "Marty, I read what you wrote. I'm sorry. I always thought Jacob was slick, but I never imagined this." I shrugged. Neither did I. But here we are. Then came the emails, messages from old colleagues, poker buddies, even the pastor from our church who once scolded me for swearing during bingo night. They weren't just offering condolences. They were telling me their stories. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. One man said his daughter slowly drained his bank account over 2 years by buying gifts she never gave him. Another told me his nephew moved in to help and left with the deed to his house. This wasn't just my war. It was a battlefield full of names no one spoke aloud. And then came the call that turned the whole thing on its head. Channel 9 News, local investigative reporter, names Trina Marks, sharp-eyed, fast-talking, with a voice like a loaded revolver. "I read your letter," she said, "and I think it's a story our viewers need to hear." I almost hung up. I didn't want to be a spectacle. I wanted justice, not headlines. But Trina wasn't interested in drama. She wanted the facts. And she wanted people to see what this kind of betrayal looks like in real life. So I agreed. The interview was scheduled for a Friday. They came to my house with cameras, lights, and microphones that made my hearing aid buzz like a dying bee. I sat in my living room wearing my best flannel shirt, while Trina asked me questions that felt like surgery. "When did you first realize something was wrong? How much money are we talking? What do you want to say to your son, if he's watching?" That last one hit like a slap. I looked straight into the lens and said, "Jacob, you didn't just steal my money. You stole my dignity. And I'm taking both back." The piece aired that night, prime time. I didn't expect what came next. By Saturday morning, my phone was buzzing like it was on life support. Messages, emails, people I hadn't heard from in decades, even strangers. Some were angry, some sympathetic. But one stood out. "Hi, Mr. Reynolds. I work at Fidelity Trust. I believe your son recently transferred funds through us under a shared power of attorney. We may have found irregularities. Can we talk?" Can we talk? I would have baked them a pie if I still had an oven that worked. That call led to another. And another. Turns out, Jacob had moved money not just from my accounts, but through multiple shell entities, some of which were tied to a consulting firm that had no employees, no tax filings, and no physical address except for a UPS box in Las Vegas. Cute. My lawyer, Felicia, went into overdrive. She filed motions, froze every asset tied to Jacob's name, and requested an emergency court hearing. "We hit him fast," she said, "and hard, before he can slither somewhere warm." Meanwhile, Jacob, silent. No calls, no texts, just absence. Until the subpoena was served. I wasn't there when it happened, but according to the process server, who sounded a bit too gleeful, Jacob opened the door wearing silk pajamas and dropped his smoothie when he saw the envelope. "Guess your son drinks kiwi kale justice now," Felicia quipped. The hearing was set for Tuesday morning. Civil court. Downtown. I showed up in a gray suit that still smelled faintly of mothballs and memory. Felicia stood beside me, armed with binders, folders, and a glare that could melt granite. Jacob arrived late. He looked smaller, less polished, like someone had scrubbed the confidence off his face with steel wool. No fancy sweater, no rehearsed grin, just a man who finally realized Dad wasn't a pushover with arthritis. He was an avalanche in waiting. His lawyer, a fresh-faced kid who looked like he still lived on instant noodles, tried to argue consent, power of attorney, blah, blah, blah. Felicia tore it apart like tissue paper. He exploited access, used it to launder, hide, and falsify. That's not management. That's manipulation. And we have the paper trail to prove it. The judge didn't blink once. After an hour, he ordered a full financial review, immediate freezing of all personal and business accounts linked to Jacob, and a restraining order from touching any remaining assets. That wasn't the end. Court proceedings take time. But it was a beginning. As we walked out, cameras flashed. Trina was there. She asked how I felt. I paused, looked at the gray sky, and said, "Lighter. Not free yet, but lighter." That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun finally peek through the clouds. Doris came by, said she saw the news, hugged me so tightly I swear I heard my ribs squeak. "You're brave," she said. I shook my head. I'm just old enough to stop being quiet. But even as that first real breath filled my lungs, I knew one thing. This fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. You've seen justice begin, but you haven't seen the price yet. What happens next will make you question everything about family and forgiveness. Don't miss it. Here's something they don't print on the pamphlet when you sue your own child. There is no real victory, no parade, no confetti, no slow-motion courtroom applause. There's just a quiet room, a chair you sit in afterward, and a memory you can't put down. Yes, I won the case, technically, after months of digging, filings, hearings, and one particularly intense deposition where Jacob tried to act like a victim. I walked out with a court order restoring my property, annulling the second mortgage, and reclaiming what was left of my retirement accounts. Roughly 62% of what he took was recoverable. The rest? Gone. Spent on whatever lifestyle brand of self-importance he was selling that week. The court froze his business assets and barred him from handling finances for anyone again. A small mercy for the next poor soul who might have trusted that handshake and fake grin. And Jacob? He vanished. Not literally. He wasn't jailed. Financial crimes rarely lead to orange jumpsuits unless you steal from billionaires. He just disappeared, moved out of town, changed numbers, left behind a crater where a sun used to be. And that's where the real story starts. Because no one prepares you for what it feels like to outlive your family while they're still breathing. It's not like grief. It's like the opposite of nostalgia. Remembering things that now feel like lies. Birthday parties, graduation speeches, family road trips to Yosemite where he used to fall asleep on my shoulder. "What do you do with that?" I asked my therapist. "Yes, I started therapy at 75. Don't act surprised. Emotional trauma doesn't get gentler with age. It just hides deeper. She said something that stuck with me. You can carry the pain, or you can carry the lesson. Not both. So I chose the lesson. I downsized, sold the house, the yellow-kitchened, memory-drenched museum I once called home, and moved into a smaller cottage near the edge of town. Quiet, modest, easier to clean, harder to haunt. I joined a local advocacy group for elder abuse survivors. Yeah, that's a thing. I didn't know either. Sad how many of us there are. I gave a talk once, just once, but it stayed with people. I said, we're told to trust family. That blood is thicker than betrayal. But sometimes, love has nothing to do with biology, and everything to do with boundaries. They clapped. I didn't ask them to, but in that room, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a cautionary tale. I felt like a damn survivor. I started cooking again, not for others, just for me. Banana pancakes on Sundays, meatloaf on Tuesdays. Sometimes Doris comes over. She still lives across town and swears my pancakes have healing properties. The local paper did a follow-up piece. Headline read, "The man who took his life back, one signature at a time." It made me smile, not because of the recognition, but because they finally got it right. This wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about reclaiming control when the world insists you're done. It was about saying, I'm still here, and you don't get to write my ending. I haven't heard from Jacob since the verdict. Not a call, not a card, not even a petty little email trying to spin things his way. Good. Let him sit in silence. Let him learn the hard way that forgiveness isn't automatic, and redemption isn't free. Maybe one day he'll show up, maybe with an apology, maybe with more lies, maybe with a wrinkle in his face that looks too much like mine. If he does, I'll be ready. Not with hate, not with vengeance, but with a chair, an empty one, and a simple choice. Tell me the truth, and mean it. Until then, I live. I plant herbs, I read detective novels, I take long walks where I don't rush anymore. And every now and then, when someone at the grocery store mentions they're thinking of letting their son help with finances, I stop, lean in close, and say, don't hand over your life in a manila folder, not unless you're ready to bury it.